Well, hey, good morning, everyone. Grace and peace. Welcome to Find the Intersection. My name is Paul Dezay. It's good to be with you on this rainy Wednesday morning in Columbus, Indiana. So, today we are going to be talking about the intersection passages for this coming Sunday, which is the Sunday after Trinity Sunday. And so we're in ordinary time now. So what that means is from Pentecost, right after Pentecost, all the way until Christ the King Sunday, we have this long journey that represents our ordinary lives and ordinary times. And so this is kind of when, rubber hits the road. This is when we are just kind of going through the grind. And so ordinary life, Christ meets us where we are. And so we're in ordinary time. And so let's go ahead and jump into the passages for this coming Sunday. And there we go. And we're going to be talking today about Monday's passage, which was Mark 3. And then yesterday's passage, 2 Corinthians 4. And today's passage, Genesis chapter 3. So let's talk about each of those briefly. First, Mark chapter 3, verses 20 to 35. This is an interesting passage. People think Jesus is crazy. His family think he's crazy. The legal experts think that he's in with the devil, right? In with Satan. And it seems like what's going on is a crowd has emerged, and crowds in the Bible, for the most part, tend not to be good things, right? A lot of things happen in crowds that go the wrong way. And Jesus' popularity is growing. I mean, earlier in this chapter, he's healing people. All kinds of people are coming to him for healing, and he's trying to get a meal with the disciples, and it's getting nuts. And so his family are on the way, thinking that he's gone crazy. People think he's in league with Satan. And so Jesus talks to them about this idea of if Jesus was with the devil, then there wouldn't be all of this fruit. Like people are getting healed and set free from demons and things. Obviously, that would be disastrous for the kingdom of Satan if Jesus was working and doing all these things along with him. And so Jesus is making it clear that no, he's the one who's binding up the evil one, the strong man in this passage. And in this, I think the big um, takeaway for me is a redefinition of family that emerges. You know, his family, his probably his siblings, and they were trying to move him away, take him away. Um, and he says, no, these are my family now. And that's hard for us because we live in a world that emphasizes and prioritizes the nuclear family, and so in the days of Jesus, there is this redefinition away from blood per se into this idea of the church and the kingdom as becoming our first family. And at baptism, that's what we do. We're kind of welcome into the church, and our church becomes our first family. And that's hard for all of us. It's hard for me. I love my family, and I love the church as well. But it's hard to put those two side by side very easily. And that's what Jesus is doing. He is defeating Satan, and he is welcoming the strangest of people into his family. So anyway, Tuesday's passage, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 13 all the way to the first verse in chapter 5. Now, these are very encouraging words by Paul. Paul is saying that because we know the one who raised Jesus from the dead will also bring us with him, that he will raise us up. And so this is a really encouraging passage for people who are going through difficult days, difficult times. Paul talks about these temporal things because he's trying to get us to see in light of eternity. These things that we're going through, and yes, they're difficult, and yes, they break God's heart. In line for eternity, God's going to see us through. He's with us in the midst of the struggles of life, and he's going to carry us through into this eternal home that he promises us, which is the new heavens and the new earth that we see in the end of Revelation and also in Isaiah. is that God's going to make things right. He's going to. So he gets encouragement to trust God in the midst of persecution, in the midst of discouragement, in the midst of evil, which we connect to yesterday's or Monday's passage. So in this last verse, I think it's, or the first verse of chapter 5, for we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And so this is the promise to those that are going through hard times. God's going to carry us through. God's going to carry us through. I could talk a lot more about this, but I think we'll save it for the sermon on Sunday. And one other thing, in the very beginning, he talks about faithfulness, and he's connecting the faithfulness to Israel's covenant. And Israel's covenant, God was faithful to Israel, and we see that God is, through Jesus, is being faithful to his people. So, and then today's passage is Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 to 15, and I'm sure this is a familiar passage. Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve are hiding from God, who's walking in the garden, right? Where are you? First words, right, to humanity. Where are you? Now, God knows where Adam and Eve are. It's not like a game of hide and seek, but it's the question is, does Adam and Eve know where they are? Do they realize that by not trusting in God, by trusting in the craftiness of the serpent in this story, we see them alienating themselves from God and alienating themselves from one another. This distrust, this sin, leads to destruction in their lives and in their relationships. And it breaks the heart of God. And we see that throughout Scripture, that God's heart breaks when we go our own way. God's heart breaks when we are alienated from him and alienated from one another. Sin alienates us from God and one another. Sin is a lack of trust. Now, the serpent in this passage represents evil. So there's this thread that is woven through these passages. And we'll talk more about that on Friday. This thread of evil, this thread of going against the direction of God. And there are consequences to that moving away from God. And God is working to put things back together again, but there are consequences. And in Genesis, the last verse there, verse number 14, really 14 and 15, we see the consequences. Because you have done this, cursed are you among all animals and among all wild creatures. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all the days of your life. That's towards the serpent, of course. And then verse 15, I will put enmity between you and your offspring, and between your offspring and hers. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. And that's a kind of prophecy of Jesus coming to defeat the enemy. And so we see that thread throughout as Jesus, God, is working against the strong man, working against Satan, working against the evil in the world. And the question that we will wrestle with on Sunday in the sermon, sorry, I always have to get a little plug, is how is God doing that? How is God defeating evil? So anyway, that's all I got. Those are brief little looks into these passages. I'll be back tomorrow to talk about Psalm 130, and then on Friday for the intersections. I hope you stay dry today on this rainy day, and grace and peace to you.